The first time I saw the lakefront property, I knew it was mine. Quiet, secluded, with a private dock and a slice of shoreline that looked like it had been carved out just for me. I'm Xavier Mullen, 47, divorced and finally done with the city grind. I wanted peace, not problems. But the second I signed the deed and moved in, I found out I had a problem. And her name was Brenda Hawley. Brenda was the self-appointed queen of the Lakewood Haven HOA. Late 40s, loud hair, louder voice, and always carrying a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. I hadn't even unpacked my boxes when she walked straight up my driveway like she owned it. "You must be the new homeowner," she said, squinting over her sunglasses. "I'm Brenda, HOA chairwoman, just wanted to swing by and clarify a few things." I leaned against the tailgate of my truck. "Such as that dock," she said, pointing past my house toward the lake. "That's subject to public access. Our HOA has long-standing rights to use that shoreline. It's part of the community's shared recreational zone." I blinked. "No, that's private land." "It was in the listing, and the agent said, well, he was wrong," she interrupted, with that tight-lipped tone that made it sound like she was doing me a favor. "It's common knowledge here. We've all used that area for years. We host the 4th of July picnic right on that dock." "Not anymore, you don't," I said. "That dock came with the property. It's on my parcel." Brenda gave a sharp little laugh. "Oh, honey, you're new. It's in the HOA bylaws." "You'll see." She turned and strutted back down my driveway like she'd just laid down the law, except I don't take well to threats wrapped in fake smiles. That night, I pulled out my title packet and started digging. I'm no lawyer, but I'm not stupid either. My dad always said, if someone wants what's yours, start with the paperwork. I spent the next few days reviewing everything. The title chain went back nearly 70 years, and not once did any document show an easement, right-of-way, or shared access agreement for that shoreline. The dock, the trees around it, the narrow path leading down, every inch of it was mine. Legally. Clean title. The kicker. The HOA was incorporated only 22 years ago. They couldn't claim a right that didn't exist before they did. So I printed out every document, mapped every parcel, and made copies. Because I knew people like Brenda didn't back down. They doubled down. Sure enough, 3 days later, I caught 2 teenage boys fishing off my dock. When I asked them what they were doing, one of them said, "Brenda said we're allowed. It's public." The next morning, I found a note taped to my door in all caps. "You are violating HOA community access rules. Remove the fence immediately or face fines." A fence? I hadn't even built one yet. That's when I realized Brenda wasn't just mistaken. She was bluffing, pushing, and hoping I'd cave like the last poor homeowner who crossed her. She picked the wrong guy this time. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. By the time the second note appeared, this one tucked under my windshield wiper, and written in the same aggressive handwriting. I had already installed 2 trail cameras facing the dock and the lake path. I wasn't taking any chances. If they wanted a fight over property rights, they'd get it in high definition. That morning, right after tossing the new note into a drawer, I drove down to the county assessor's office. I didn't just want confirmation, I wanted the original surveys, signatures, the legal descriptions from the day this land was first parceled out. The clerk, an older gentleman with a voice like gravel, pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Parcel 7B14 and handed it to me. "This goes back to 1953, he said. "Not many properties around here with uninterrupted private shoreline. You lucked out." I flipped through the yellowed pages and snapped pictures of everything. Surveyor stamps, boundary lines, notarized affidavits. One document from the early 70s even showed a rejected petition to designate a walking trail through what was now my backyard. The owner at the time had fought it and won. That trail never got built, which meant this whole public access myth wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a fairy tale the HOA invented and repeated until everyone else believed it. Back home, I decided it was time to talk with more than just Brenda. I went door to door that weekend, introducing myself to the neighbors. Not with confrontation, just conversation. Most of them were friendly, even apologetic when they realized I was the dock guy. A few admitted they never really looked into the access rules. But then I met Carl and Denise, retired teachers who'd lived 2 doors down since the late 80s. Carl leaned on his cane and motioned me inside without a word. Denise had already made coffee. "She's been pulling this routine for over a decade," Denise said, handing me a mug. "Started with lawn inspections, then fence colors. Now she acts like the Lakeshurst to delegate," Carl nodded. "She got the old McKinney couple fined into selling. Said their rose bushes violated view ordinances." "View ordinances?" I asked. "They don't exist," Denise said. "But she says them like they're gospel, and most folks don't question her." I left with more than just caffeine in my system. I had context. Brenda wasn't just power-hungry. She was quietly rewriting the rules in her favor, counting on silence and confusion to get her way. The next week, I received a formal citation, this one on HOA letterhead, complete with a fake-looking legal review stamp. It claimed I owed $600 in violations for non-compliance with communal access agreements. The letter warned that failure to pay would result in a lien against my property. That's when I called my cousin Layla. She's a real estate attorney in Raleigh. I forwarded the letter, the photos, and the title history. 2 nights later we talked. "This is more than overreach," she said. "They're threatening legal action without any actual basis. That's fraud. If they try to lien your house, it's illegal interference with your property rights. What do you suggest?" Let me draft a response and start recording everything. Also, do you know if they've filed any of these fines with the county? I didn't, but I would find out. That Friday, I marched into the county clerk's office with the citation in hand. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses and a sharp memory, scanned the registry. "There are no liens or pending claims on your property. Has the HOA filed anything against other properties?" She tapped her keyboard, then frowned. "Looks like they filed 10 liens over the past 3 years, but none of them cite actual municipal code. Just internal HOA documentation." I asked if I could get copies. She nodded. Later that night, I flipped through the stack and saw the pattern. Every single lien was based on Community Ordinance 12.3, which, according to the HOA's own printed rules, didn't exist. It skipped from 12.2 to 12.4. Brenda had been inventing violations out of thin air and submitting them to the county as if they were lawful. That's when I called the sheriff's office. 2 deputies came by the next morning. I laid out the documentation, the fraudulent fines, the fake ordinance numbers, the property history, and the fact that Brenda had been threatening liens on private land with no legal basis. Deputy Harlan, who looked like he'd seen more than a few HOA battles, asked one question. "Did she collect any money?" "Not from me, but I think she did from others." He exchanged a glance with his partner. "That could be wire fraud. If she's collecting under false pretenses and sending those funds through HOA accounts, it's a felony." I gave them everything. While the deputies began their investigation, I followed Layla's advice. I sent a formal cease and desist letter to Brenda and the HOA board, citing specific statutes and attaching a copy of my title history. I informed them that any further attempt to access my property, distribute false claims, or threaten fines would result in civil and criminal action. 3 days later, Brenda showed up at my door again, this time without her clipboard. "You're making this way more complicated than it needs to be," she said. "I'm not the one inventing ordinances. We're just trying to preserve the community. You don't understand how things work here. No, you don't understand how property law works." She shifted her stance, eyes narrowing. "You're going to regret making this public. I already made it legal. Now it's about to be criminal." She left without another word. The next week, the sheriff's office sent a notice to the HOA board requesting financial records. I heard through Carl that Brenda called an emergency meeting, but only 2 board members showed up. One of them had already resigned, citing ethical concerns. Then came the real bombshell. The county prosecutor filed charges against Brenda for submitting fraudulent documents to a government office, 1 count for each fake lien. 10 felonies. She was arrested at her home in the middle of the afternoon in full view of the lake. The HOA scrambled. A new interim board was voted in. They immediately suspended all pending fines and issued a community-wide letter stating that no resident could be penalized without documented evidence and legal review. The new chair, a soft-spoken woman named Priya, personally visited me to apologize. "We've been asleep at the wheel," she said. "This won't happen again." I told her I'd hold her to that. I still live by the lake. The dock is quiet now, no more teenagers fishing on false permission slips. Brenda's house went up for sale 2 months later. I didn't attend the auction, but I heard it sold below market. As for me, I put up 1 small sign on the dock. Just 1 line, burned into cedar with a wood burner. Private property title verified. No one's challenged it since. 2 weeks after Brenda's arrest, my mailbox was crammed with sealed envelopes. Not fines this time, letters. Handwritten, typed, even a few printed emails. Neighbors I hadn't met poured out gratitude, support, and in more than 1 case, apologies. Turns out Brenda's reach went deeper than anyone had imagined. Several families had been quietly paying discretionary access fees for years, afraid to speak up. One couple, the Warners, admitted they'd been fined over $2,000 for unauthorized kayak storage on their own deck. I wasn't surprised anymore. I'd already seen how deep her bluff ran, but there was 1 letter that stood out. No return address, just my name written in careful block letters. Inside was a photocopy of what looked like internal HOA financial records, spreadsheets with names, dates, and payment descriptions like dock access dues, shoreline maintenance, and compliance incentive. The total: over $30,000 collected from residents across 5 years. All of it undocumented in any official HOA filings. I folded the pages and locked them in my filing cabinet. The sheriff's office hadn't asked for tips from the public, but I figured they'd want this. Before I delivered it, though, I wanted to learn more. That weekend, I drove into town and visited the public library's archive room. It was a dusty corner of the building, barely used except by local historians and the occasional genealogist. With the help of a volunteer librarian named Jonah, I pulled HOA meeting minutes going back to their incorporation year. Most of them were boring talks about landscaping bids, neighborhood watch, the occasional dispute over mailbox designs. But 1 entry from 12 years ago caught my eye. It mentioned a shoreline access committee and an initiative to normalize community use of the lakefront zone. The language was vague, but the note beside it wasn't. It read, "Action item, begin informal integration of South Dock usage, no legal filing required at this time." I showed it to Jonah. "Looks like they planned this whole thing," I said. He adjusted his glasses and nodded. "That's a staged encroachment. It's common in land disputes. Use it long enough without challenge and people assume it's legal. But there's no statute of limitation for trespassing on titled land." "Exactly," he said. I thanked him and left with a photocopy of the page. The next morning I handed it, along with the anonymous financial documents, to Deputy Harlan at the sheriff's station. He didn't say much, but I noticed the way his eyebrows lifted when he saw the totals. He tapped the papers, then picked up the phone. By Wednesday, a forensic accountant from the county was assigned to the case. This time, the investigation wasn't just about Brenda, it was about the HOA itself. The board's financial accounts were frozen pending review, and subpoenas were issued for bank records going back 15 years. Meanwhile, the interim board scrambled to salvage the community's trust. Priya, the new chair, invited every homeowner to a town hall at the community center. I went, more out of curiosity than concern. The room was packed. Folding chairs scraped against the tile floor as people murmured and shifted. Some whispered, others stared at the few remaining board members like they were guilty by association. Priya stepped up to the podium, holding a stack of papers. "I know many of you feel betrayed," she began. "We do too. This board is committed to full transparency moving forward, but we need to acknowledge the harm that has been done." Voices rose from the back. "What about the money we paid? Are we getting refunds?" "Why didn't anyone stop this sooner?" I stood and raised my hand. Priya nodded. "If I may," I said, "this was never just about dock access. This was property theft disguised as community regulation. The documents I found show this scheme was active for more than a decade. We need more than transparency, we need restitution, and a complete audit of every board member who served during that time." The room erupted with applause. Later that night, I got a knock on my door. It was Rick, a retired contractor who'd lived on the far end of the neighborhood. "I've got something you ought to see," he said, holding up a battered manila envelope. Inside were blueprints and old HOA newsletters, some dating back to the early 2000s. One issue had a map showing shared amenities, including the dock behind my house, labeled Community Access Zone C. It had never been filed with the county or approved in any official capacity. "It's propaganda," Rick said. "Brenda passed these out back when she was trying to get elected to the board." I added the map to my growing pile of evidence. By now, the sheriff's office had opened a second case, conspiracy to defraud. The investigation uncovered a slush fund and unreported checking account under a fake vendor name. Brenda had created it during her second year as chair, using an alias to filter money from access fees and violation penalties. The charges multiplied: mail fraud, embezzlement, criminal misrepresentation. A grand jury was convened, and the county prosecutor announced that multiple former board members were being investigated as co-conspirators. One of them fled the state. Another lawyered up and refused to speak. The fallout shook Lakewood Haven. Homeowners began demanding changes to the HOA charter. A group formed to push for full dissolution of the association, something that hadn't been done in the county before. I was asked to join, but I declined. I'd fought my battle. It was time for others to step up. Still, I helped where I could. I provided documents, connected neighbors with Layla for legal advice, and made sure the county's restitution office had every scrap of evidence I'd collected. The anonymous letter had been a turning point, and I still didn't know who sent it, but I had a hunch. One afternoon, I spotted a young woman standing near the lake path, staring at the water. She looked out of place, too well dressed for a stroll, no fishing pole, no dog. I walked over. "You leave something behind?" I asked. She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "My parents used to live here. Before Brenda forced them out. I was 16 when it happened. I waited. They paid over $5,000 in shoreline fees. They didn't know it was fake until it was too late. Had to sell the house to cover the liens." "You sent the letter," I said quietly. She nodded. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "You did the right thing." She gave me a grateful look, then turned and walked away. I never saw her again. By the end of the year, the HOA had been completely restructured. The slush fund was liquidated, and the money returned proportionally to those who had paid into it. Brenda was sentenced to 6 years in state prison. 2 former board members accepted plea deals and agreed to testify against others still under investigation. My dock is still mine. The shoreline is quiet, except for loons and the occasional canoe gliding past. The community, once fractured, has started to rebuild, this time with eyes wide open. Every now and then, I get asked by new residents about what happened here. I point them toward the county records and let the story speak for itself. I didn't come to Lakewood Haven to make enemies, but I wasn't about to roll over for them either. Some people say peace is just the absence of conflict. I disagree. Peace is knowing that when the clipboard comes walking up your driveway, you've already got the paperwork ready and the whole neighborhood behind you. By early spring, Lakewood Haven felt like a different place. The wind still carried the scent of pine. The lake remained calm and glassy most mornings, but the tension that once lingered like mildew had lifted. People waved more often. Dogs roamed off-leash without whispered complaints. It was the kind of neighborhood Brenda always claimed she was trying to build, except now it existed without her. But just as I thought things had finally settled, something else surfaced. It started when I received a call from a woman named Dana Kirkland, a paralegal working with the county's Special Investigations Unit. She'd been assigned to assist the forensic audit of the HOA's finances. Her tone was professional, clipped, but carried an undertone of concern. "We've run into something unusual," she said. "Would you be willing to come down to the courthouse?" I agreed, and the next day I sat across from her in a windowless records room deep in the county building. She slid a folder across the table. "During our audit, we discovered a secondary ledger," she said. "It wasn't in the main financial files. It was embedded in an encrypted folder on a flash drive recovered from Brenda Hawley's desk. Inside were printouts of what looked like rental agreements, short-term leases for the HOA's exclusive lakeside access areas. They were signed with Brenda's name and notarized by someone listed only as R. Greeley. The dates spanned nearly 6 years. The lessees, a mix of out-of-county addresses, some corporate entities, and one shell LLC based out of Nevada. "These aren't residents," I said. "No," Dana replied. And these leases weren't disclosed to the HOA board during any of the years in question. "We think Brenda was privately renting out portions of what she called shared shoreline, including parts of your property, without anyone's knowledge." I stared at the documents. The signatures, the false parcel descriptions, the inclusion of amenities like private dock usage and watercraft storage. All of it was fraudulent, and it went beyond her previous level of manipulation. This wasn't just an internal HOA scandal anymore. This was commercial-level real estate fraud. "How much money was she making off this?" I asked. Dana hesitated. "We're still calculating, but so far, we've traced over $90,000 in deposits connected to these leases." It hit me like a cold wave. She'd been selling access to my land. Not just to neighbors, but to strangers, businesses, likely tourists, and she'd been doing it for years. "I want to press charges," I said. "You won't need to," Dana replied. "The district attorney already is." Within a week, the DA's office filed a new criminal complaint, 23 counts of felony real estate fraud plus 4 counts of money laundering and 2 of racketeering. It wasn't just Brenda in the crosshairs anymore. The notary, R. Greeley, turned out to be Randall Greeley, a former HOA treasurer who'd resigned quietly 5 years earlier. He was arrested crossing into Georgia with a suitcase full of burner phones and over $14,000 in cash. The court date was scheduled for June. In the meantime, the county prosecutor issued a formal request for victims to come forward. More than a dozen residents submitted sworn affidavits, detailing how their properties had been misrepresented or used without consent. I was asked to testify as a key witness, given that my land had been specifically named in several of the fraudulent leases. The night before the hearing, I walked the shoreline behind my house. The dock was still intact, though I'd reinforced the supports that spring. The moonlight skipped across the water like silver coins. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a warning. It felt earned. The trial drew a crowd. Local media packed the benches, and the courtroom had to add folding chairs along the aisle. Brenda appeared in a navy pantsuit, noticeably thinner, her hair tied back tightly. She refused to look at anyone. When I took the stand, I was asked to describe the sequence of events, how I discovered the title discrepancies, the fabricated ordinances, the unauthorized access, and finally, the fraudulent leases. I held nothing back. The prosecutor handed me one of the fake lease agreements and asked if I recognized the parcel number listed. "That's my property," I said. "But the document lists it as a shared use zone. That's not true. It never has been." "The title is clear. Was your consent ever requested for this lease? Not once. And were you compensated? No. In fact, I was threatened with fines if I restricted access. The defense tried to argue that Brenda had believed the leases were valid under customary community practice, but the judge didn't buy it. Especially not after the forensic accountant testified that Brenda had funneled lease payments through a side business registered under her cousin's name, one that had no employees and no declared income. By the second day, Greeley flipped. He agreed to a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. He testified that Brenda had orchestrated the entire scheme, even coached him on how to notarize signatures without verifying identities. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Brenda was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with no chance of parole for the first 7. Greeley received 3 years and a permanent revocation of his notary license. The fraudulent leases were nullified, and the court ordered the liquidation of Brenda's assets, including her lakefront home, to pay restitution. That summer, the county approved a new oversight rule for HOAs operating within its jurisdiction. All fines, easements, or access agreements now had to be filed with and reviewed by the county registrar's office. Priya stepped down from the board, saying she'd helped steer the ship through the storm, but it was time for new hands at the wheel. The HOA held an open election for the first time in its history. Carl, the retired teacher 2 doors down, was elected president. His platform, "No more nonsense." I declined the nomination for vice chair, but I agreed to serve on the oversight committee, not because I wanted power. Because I wanted insurance. Quiet neighborhoods don't stay that way by accident. One Saturday in late August, I hosted a small gathering at my dock. No permits, no board meetings, no clipboard-wielding tyrants. Just neighbors laughing, grilling, telling stories about the time they almost let someone sell them their own backyard. Denise brought a pie. Rick showed up with a cooler full of homemade root beer. Kids splashed off the dock, and someone played guitar while the sun dipped behind the trees. As the sky turned amber, Carl leaned over and said, "You know, this place finally feels like a community." "It always could have been," I said. "It just needed the right people to stand up." He nodded and looked out across the lake. No warnings, no fake violations. Just still water and the sound of real peace. That night, after everyone left, I walked down to the dock alone. I sat on the bench I'd built that spring, the one facing west, and watched the stars ripple across the surface of the lake. No lawsuits, no threats, no counterfeit leases. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing the land beneath me was mine, and this time, no one could take it away.